Scientists just pulled DNA out of a tooth that had been sitting in a museum drawer since the 19th century. Nobody had looked twice at it for over 100 years. It was just a fossil, just another fragment of an extinct human. And then the sequencing results came back, and a room full of researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology went quiet. Because the DNA inside that tooth did not match anything they expected. It connected a Neanderthal who died in Belgium 45,000 years ago to populations living thousands of miles away across open country in the Caucasus Mountains between Europe and Asia, a genetic link spanning 1,900 miles, in a species that everyone assumed lived in small, isolated inbred groups, slowly dying at the edge of extinction. That single tooth, recovered from a cave called Goyet in Belgium, became part of the most important study of Neanderthal genetics ever published. A June 2026 paper in Nature by researcher Alba Bossoms Mesa and a large international team from the Max Planck Institute that sequenced genetic data from 27 Neanderthals who lived in Belgium and France less than 52,500 years ago. And what it revealed about who the Neanderthals really were, where they truly came from and why they vanished, does not match the version of events that has been taught for decades. The brutish, isolated, slow-witted cousin shambling toward inevitable extinction. That picture is gone. The DNA has replaced it with something far more complicated, far more human, and in certain moments, genuinely impossible to believe until you look at the numbers. To understand why the new findings hit so hard, you have to understand what the old story was and how completely it had settled into place. For most of the 20th century, Neanderthals were understood through their bones. Heavy brow ridges, large barrel chests, short, stocky limbs built for conserving heat in Ice Age winters. Their tools were simpler than those of the modern humans who eventually replaced them. Their brain cases were large, but shaped differently, elongated in ways that some researchers interpreted as evidence of different cognitive organization. They buried their dead, which suggested some capacity for symbolic thought, but the mainstream consensus was cautious about how much to credit them with. They were strong, they were cold adapted, they survived for hundreds of thousands of years across Europe and Western Asia. But when modern humans arrived out of Africa approximately 60,000 years ago and began pushing into Neanderthal territory, the Neanderthals lost. By around 40,000 years ago, they were gone. The story ended there, extinct, replaced, a dead branch. The prevailing explanation for why they lost was built on a combination of competitive disadvantage and demographic fragility. Modern humans had larger social networks. They traded over longer distances. Their technology was more flexible and innovative. And crucially, the genetic evidence seemed to show that Neanderthal populations were small and increasingly isolated, prone to inbreeding that reduced genetic diversity and accumulated harmful mutations. You could read this story in the DNA of individual Neanderthals sequenced before 2026. The Chigirskaya Cave. Neanderthals in Siberia, who lived around 60,000 years ago, showed extreme inbreeding, with some individuals clearly the offspring of closely related parents. The picture that emerged was of a species in demographic freefall, populations shrinking, gene pools contracting, reproductive choices narrowing to whoever was left nearby. A species not outcompeted so much as quietly collapsing under its own genetic weight. That was the story. And it was not wrong exactly. Some Neanderthal populations did show exactly those patterns. But it was grotesquely incomplete, because it was built on a tiny sample, fewer than 4 high-quality Neanderthal genomes in the entire world, from individuals spread across a huge geographic range and an enormous time span. Drawing conclusions about the entire species from 4 genomes is roughly like trying to understand all of human history from the DNA of 4 people. You can get some things right, but you will miss almost everything. The 2026 Nature study changed the scale of the evidence overnight. 27 new Neanderthals, from 10 archaeological sites in Belgium and France, all living within the last 52,500 years of Neanderthal existence. Some of these specimens had been sitting in museum collections for over a century and a half, including one called Angus II, which holds the distinction of being the very first Neanderthal specimen ever discovered by modern science, found in Belgium in the 1820s, but not recognized as Neanderthal until much later. Another specimen, the true Magritte femur, had been misidentified as belonging to a different species entirely and only correctly attributed to Neanderthals in 2015. A tooth from Wallow Cave had been excavated in 1997 and then essentially waited nearly 3 decades for the technology to catch up to what it contained. The technology that finally unlocked them was ancient DNA sequencing, refined to a level of sensitivity that allows researchers to reconstruct usable genomes from badly degraded material. Material that has sat in limestone caves for tens of thousands of years. Material that most genetics labs a generation ago would have dismissed as too damaged to yield meaningful results. When the sequencing was done and the genomes were compared, what came out dismantled the inbreeding narrative for late Western European Neanderthals almost completely. The individuals from Belgium and France did not show the extreme inbreeding signatures seen in the Siberian cave populations. Their genetic diversity was healthy. The genetic differences between individuals found at multiple sites across Belgium and France were surprisingly small, indicating regular contact and movement between communities over long distances. These were not isolated pockets of survivors huddled in caves, each group slowly losing genetic viability. They were part of a connected network, communities maintaining social ties across landscapes the size of entire modern countries, moving, meeting, exchanging genetic material, staying linked in ways that required either deliberate long-range movement or enough population density to sustain contact chains stretching hundreds of miles. And the most striking individual finding came from the Goyet high-coverage genome, the 45,000-year-old Neanderthal from Belgium, whose DNA connected genetically to populations in the Caucasus Mountains nearly 2,000 miles to the east. Not a recent connection. Not noise in the data. A genuine genetic affinity indicating shared ancestry between Western European and Caucasus Neanderthals, demonstrating that long-range population movement had connected opposite ends of the Neanderthal world during the final period of their existence. Alba Bosums Mesa told Science Alert directly, "The late Neanderthals in Belgium and France appear to have been part of a connected, genetically diverse regional population during a period of profound ecological and demographic change, not a dying remnant, a living network." But the new findings about the last Western Neanderthals are only the latest layer in a revolution in our understanding of this species that has been building through multiple studies across 2025 and 2026. Because to understand what those Belgian caves contain, you have to go back much further to the question of where Neanderthals actually came from in the first place. And that question has been getting more complicated and more fascinating with every new genome that gets sequenced. The standard story of Neanderthal origins placed their split from the lineage leading to modern humans somewhere around 500,000 years ago, with Homo heidelbergensis, a broad-skulled hominin found at sites across Africa and Europe, usually identified as the common ancestor of both lines. That timeline has been cracking under pressure from multiple directions for years. A 2025 study examining the rate of dental evolution in ancient hominin fossils from Cima de los Huesos in Spain, one of the richest Neanderthal fossil sites in the world at over 430,000 years old, concluded that the split between Neanderthals and modern humans must have occurred at least 800,000 years ago, nearly 300,000 years earlier than the standard estimate. And in 2025, a new genome analysis incorporating a previously unsequenced, very ancient hominin specimen produced a revised estimate placing the divergence of African modern human ancestors from the Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestral lineage somewhere between 825,000 and 694,000 years ago. 50,000 to 100,000 years earlier than previous genetic estimates had suggested. Crucially, this also meant that Homo heidelbergensis, already present in Eurasia between 350,000 and 600,000 years ago, could not be the last common ancestor of both Neanderthals and modern humans, as had been assumed. The timing simply does not work. The split happened too early, which means the true common ancestor of Neanderthals and modern humans remains unidentified, a ghost lineage somewhere in the middle of 1,000,000 years of human evolution that has not yet been found in the fossil or genetic record. What happened after that split is where the story becomes truly extraordinary, because the Neanderthal lineage did not travel in a straight line from origin to Europe. The DNA of different Neanderthal populations across time and space tells a story of waves, reversals, mixing events, and long-distance connections that nobody predicted. The earliest anatomically Neanderthal-looking fossils appear in Europe around 430,000 years ago, at Cima de los Huesos in Spain. But certain Neanderthal populations found further east show traces of genetic material that appears older and different, possibly carrying ancestry from populations even further east, from Central Asia, or regions adjacent to the range where Denisovans, the mysterious eastern cousins of Neanderthals, were living. In March 2026, a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences sequenced a high-coverage genome from a male Neanderthal designated D17, who lived approximately 110,000 years ago in Denisova Cave in Siberia. The sequencing involved reading every segment of the DNA an average of 37 times to reconstruct the genome with high accuracy. What it found was a Neanderthal population so small and so isolated that the individual showed long stretches of identical DNA inherited from both parents, a clear signature of inbreeding across multiple generations, a community that had been genetically cut off from other Neanderthals for a very long time. This was completely different from the late Western Neanderthals in Belgium and France. Same species, same broad time period, but genetically they were living in completely different demographic realities. The Siberian populations were dwindling islands. The Western populations were connected networks. And earlier in 2026, a study analyzing 8 Neanderthal teeth from Stynia Cave in Poland, published in Current Biology, found yet another layer. These individuals, who lived around 100,000 years ago, north of the Carpathian Mountains, a location far outside where Neanderthals were commonly thought to have ranged at that time, showed genetic ties to Neanderthals from both Western Europe and the Caucasus simultaneously. A hidden group, preserved at a site that nobody had expected to hold, Neanderthal remains at all, carrying genetic connections that span the entire breadth of the Neanderthal world and hinting that their range and their movement patterns were far more extensive than the fossil distribution had suggested. The Caucasus Mountains appear again and again in these findings as the critical corridor, the bridge between east and west through which Neanderthal populations moved, mixed, and separated across hundreds of thousands of years. And it is there that some of the most important evidence for deep interbreeding between Neanderthals and other archaic human groups has been found. The Mezmaiskaya cave in the Caucasus yielded the remains of a Neanderthal child, and her DNA connected genetically to Eastern populations in a way that placed her genetically closer to the Altai Neanderthals of Siberia than to Western European contemporaries. The same child, the same cave, showed genetic links running from Western Europe to the Caucasus to Central Asia in a single genome. A roadmap of ancient movement frozen in the bones of someone who never traveled anywhere at all. And the Altai Neanderthals themselves, particularly the female known as the Altai Neanderthal, who lived more than 120,000 years ago in the mountains of what is now Siberia near the Mongolia border, carry what is arguably the most dramatic genetic secret the entire Neanderthal dataset contains. Her genome showed evidence of interbreeding with modern humans over 100,000 years ago, long before the major out-of-Africa migration event that produced the Neanderthal DNA found in all non-African people alive today. A small group of modern humans left Africa around 100,000 years ago, encountered Neanderthals in the Middle East or Central Asia, interbred with them, and that interbreeding event left a detectable signal in the genome of a Neanderthal living in Siberia thousands of years later. Modern humans inside a Neanderthal. The flow of genes was not one-directional. It was a braided river running in multiple directions across hundreds of thousands of years. A Princeton University study mapped out that braiding in detail, showing through genome analysis that recurrent gene flow between modern humans and Neanderthals occurred over at least 200,000 years, not as a single event at a fixed point in time, but as a series of contacts, separations, and reconnections playing out across a vast stretch of prehistory. And a 2025 study from the University of California, Berkeley, mapped how Neanderthal DNA has changed in frequency in human populations over the 40,000 years since the last Neanderthals died, showing that some Neanderthal gene variants have actually increased in frequency in modern human populations, selected for because they provided advantages in immunity, fat processing, and responses to cold and sunlight. Our immune systems today still run partly on Neanderthal code. The gene variants they developed over hundreds of thousands of years of surviving Ice Age Europe, adaptations tuned to cold temperatures, low light conditions, and specific pathogen environments, became useful to the modern humans who absorbed them during interbreeding events and have been passed forward through every generation since. Every non-African person alive today carries on average between 1% and 2% Neanderthal ancestry. Even African populations, which were assumed for years to carry no Neanderthal DNA at all, have been shown by Princeton researchers to carry traces of Neanderthal genetic material introduced through back migration events where populations with Neanderthal ancestry returned to Africa and interbred with populations there. Nobody is fully free of them. So why did they disappear? The June 2026 Nature study directly challenged the most popular genetic explanation that the Neanderthals died because their genomes were deteriorating, accumulating harmful mutations through inbreeding until the species was too compromised to continue. The genomes from Belgium and France showed no evidence of increasing genetic load over time. No evidence that their DNA was degrading in ways that would compromise health or reproduction. They were genetically healthy when modern humans arrived. Alba Bosums Mesa stated clearly that the findings challenged the idea that Neanderthals disappeared mainly because their genomes steadily deteriorated. The extinction was not primarily genetic suicide. Something else finished them. The most likely answer is the most straightforward one. Modern humans arrived with larger, more interconnected social networks, more flexible and rapidly evolving technologies, and possibly with pathogens to which Neanderthals had no immune experience. The combination was lethal, not because Neanderthals were inferior, but because they were facing a competitive pressure that no amount of regional genetic health could fully offset. What the new research makes undeniable is that Neanderthals were not already dying when modern humans arrived. They were alive, connected, moving, and diverse. And whatever erased them was a crisis that happened in real time, not a slow collapse written into their genetics generations earlier. Somewhere in the caves of Belgium and France, 45,000 years ago, a connected network of communities went from thriving to gone within a few thousand years. The DNA preserves the evidence of their health. It does not preserve the record of what ended them. That part of the story is still missing, still buried somewhere under the limestone in the centuries, waiting for a tooth in a drawer that nobody has looked at yet, to give up one more answer that changes everything we thought we knew.